We're sitting in a cave, we're sitting in a cave, we're sitting in a cave, wearing shackles and chains. That's right, we're sitting in a cave, we're sitting in a cave, we're sitting in a cave. Should we try and escape?
The Philosophy Foundation is an educational charity who train philosophy graduates how to do philosophical inquiry in schools, and then we place them in schools, particularly those in disadvantaged areas, to run regular philosophy sessions with children from nursery all the way up to A-level and beyond.
We're here today by the River Thames. So, before we look at the River Thames, I've got a question for you. What is it that makes a river a river?
I think it needs water and it flows, and it's something that flows into something like a lake or the sea.
So if there was like some kind of liquid and it was flowing, you would still say that's a river.
I think the river doesn't need water because the water can freeze up, which doesn't make it water.
Our aim is to raise standards in education, to give children the tools to be able to think well for themselves. I suppose our overall aim really is to re-engage the disenfranchised.
So here's a question for everyone. If a river is frozen, if the water is frozen solid, is it still a river? Have another minute to talk to each other.
Yes, because it was a river. Yeah, because it would just have a layer of ice. It was a river, but when the sun comes out, it will unfreeze again. So and also it just has a layer of ice on the top. Underneath it's still a river.
Children are very willing, very often, particularly before the age of about 12 or 13, to pursue philosophical questions. And in this sense, children are very different from adults, because very often adults don't want to pursue philosophical questions. Parents is that they'll say that the children actually come home and tell us about philosophy, whereas it's really hard to get them to talk to us about what they've done at school on the whole. But they seem to come home and be willing to not only talk about philosophy, but also to ask us the questions that philosophy's been asking them in the classroom. And I've even had some wonderful stories, one in particular sticks in my mind, of a little girl who was what's known as a selective mute. She would not speak under pretty much any circumstances. She was just silent in the class all the time. But we found out that actually the only time she spoke in class was during philosophy. And one of the parents fed back to me, or back to the class teacher, that this little girl had asked her parents to ask her philosophical questions because she really likes them. So the parents were really delighted with that, as was I. And one of the things that Heraclitus said was, you can't step in the same river twice. I think that.
You can't step in the same river twice because the tides are always changing and the river is always moving to a new place from the river and new water is coming in, which has never been there previously.
You can step in the same river twice, because if you were to just walk up to the River Thames, you could just walk into it and then walk back out, and then walk back into it and then walk back out. It would still be the same river, and you were just stepping in it twice.
It is always changing, so whilst you're getting out of the river, it would be moving along to a next place, and when you get back in, it will be some new water you're stepping in, not the same water, and not the same river, because there's new parts of the river coming in.
Even if children don't enjoy philosophy, we often find that they still engage with philosophy because there is something intrinsically engaging about a philosophical problem. So once you understand what the philosophical problem is, it's very difficult not to engage with it. Philosophy is not currently sort of part of the central curriculum of the schools, because schools very much focus on skills. So they're interested in things like reading, writing and arithmetic, the 3 R's. However, I would argue that this is very short-sighted, because if you think about it, the 3 R's have to be underpinned by something deeper. And the thing that underpins the 3 R's, reading, writing, and any kind of skill, is particularly intellectual skills, is concepts, ideas. So philosophy addresses that. It is interested in the reasoning and the concepts and the ideas that underpin things like reading, writing, and arithmetic. In the Cambridge Review, came out a few years ago, one of the findings was that reading, writing, and arithmetic had not improved in 55 years. And the reason given for this in the review was that this was because the teachers were teaching too much to the test and not to try and deepen understanding. So there seems to be the evidence that, in fact, seeing reading, writing, and arithmetic as the kind of foundational basics is not looking deeply enough, not looking far enough. And in fact, we need to address the underlying concepts and ideas in order for those three to improve. And that's what we've called the fourth R, but when I'm feeling particularly bold, I call it the first R, because it's so important, reasoning.
Well, schools are responding very favourably to what we do. We've been in some schools for 11 years now, and we have a 90% recontract rate with all the schools that we work in. Our idea is to try and disseminate it as widely as possible, which is why we've written the books that we've written, and that's why we try and train other people outside of London to be able to do it as well. So we're starting now to work with other charities to try and disseminate the idea and the strategies as widely as possible.
After all